Okay, I think that's the end of the ads. That's the good window. Rambling Geek. Good afternoon. Thank you very much for 10 months. Wow. Appreciate that. How's it going? Oh, dear. Hey, how you doing? How's things? Work from home. Nice. Sorry, I just had to. My glasses are clean enough that if I'm looking at my screen, I don't notice it. But the moment I turn the key light on, there's a smear. um, Work from home and no one's bothering me at midday, so it must be a bacon batch. Bacon butty time. Absolutely. How's everyone doing today overall? Uh, Thank you so much. I'm waiting for the broken little finger to heal. Ouch. Having had a a little finger, I can sympathize. Although I broke my knuckle. My knuckle on my right hand is about a half inch further back than my left hand. So, and I broke the finger as well. Morning, Doctor. How you doing? Good here. You just answered that. Sorry. Um, I'm very tired, so we're gonna do what we can today. This is one of the days where I'm like, I could happily just relax and not do very much, but gotta keep moving forward, otherwise, no progress shall be made. So, what I want to achieve today is I want to kind of I've already branched the code. This is a feature tasks groundwork. So for right now, we're going to go with the concept of a task. So a planning item has requirements. Requirements can generate tasks. Those tasks are for the developers, and those tasks can be pointed. Um, if we start to blend our vocabulary as we go, if we start to get confused as to what a term, because I've got to be careful that I don't align to Jira, that I'm setting the software in the right direction, that I'm not just trying to, it doesn't look like I'm just trying to mimic Jira's terms. Now, there is some advantage in, and again, I keep going back to Jira. Jira is not the only product for doing this sort of stuff, right? But Jira is the one I have the most experience of. I'm not trying to copy what they have. I'm not trying to clone that. There is something to be said about the use of the wording, because obviously the wording is familiar. Um, but it's something will evolve over time. We'll see. What do you think of what do you think of tasks? Some story 1 of 3, some story 2 of 3, some story 3 of 3. No, the task will have its own standalone title. It will be attached to the planning item, which essentially tells the story. So the planning item really is the story. And the only reason I've called it a planning item to now is, again, to differentiate from the current ingrained concept we're going to have of what a story involves. Realistically, the planning item is the story. The planning item is built to describe the requirements. It's built to describe what is expected from a user perspective. To be a task that's attached to a story, so you'll get that traceability. Yeah. planning item. Yeah, we'll keep using the word planning, the term planning item right this second. Ultimately, we may agree on that being what we refer to as a story. But yeah, the tasks as we have them will be attached to the requirements of a planning item. So there'll be a driving requirement for this task. Where's Dota? Add back of note card. Sorry. So let's start the application up, and we can go through this once more just to review. Let that begin. As always, if there's any questions, thoughts, opinions, I'm happy to hear them. I'm happy to talk about this. I think this sort of thing, if I just forge ahead with my own opinions on what this should become, then I'm not really keeping in the spirit of this being a developer focused tool. Or oh no, again, it's not a developer focused tool. It's a developer not focused tool. um, I want to take the load off the development team for doing a lot of management stuff. Wait for 12 projects. Welcome back, daughter. What are your requirements? I remember differences of opinion on it. Your requirements. What am I terming requirements? So requirements. There's two perspectives for requirements, right? Yeah. Um, Let me start the app. Let's not have Gran Turismo up on the screen, otherwise that'll just distract me. Really? No, it's not built yet. The requirement I gave was very general. As a developer, I can track my tasks for a sentence test name. I really like that format since it's unlikely to change. Okay. Load, yes, son of a. Okay. Introduce developer tasks. If the product manager puts something in as a developer, I can track my tasks. That's too vague, right? But what they're thinking of this as is they should be they're trying to describe what they're seeing, right? So a requirement as far as the product team goes, as far as the planning team goes, is realistically, how do they interact with the application to get what they want? So to say that we can, that we've introduced developer tasks involves these three requirements. We need a new area. We need to be able to see the backlog. And as we identified yesterday, the backlog is useless unless we actually can create a task. So we need to create a task. And this as an engineering group. Remember, again, I'm trying to avoid the word developer because if I say developer, it's focused purely on developers. And realistically, this is everything that is in the tasks system is built for anybody who produces product, whether that be DevOps, whether that be operations, whether that be QA, UI, UX, whether that be, because UI, UX could do the same thing, right? Tasks could be built for UI, UX. Which is a good point. There's a different workflow there. But anyway, interesting. The steps to track the tasks in that description are what you describe as too vague. I'd have log into application, click to developer screen, click on the item, etc. So again, from a product perspective, this is kind of what they're expecting when this thing is produced, which is why I'm saying that just because this is one requirement doesn't mean this doesn't yield many tasks. There might be a lot of work involved in doing just one of these things, but they see a very different thing. So, like, I'd like to see a backlog of the work pending. Well, from a development perspective, this involves us being able to get that into the view. To get that into the view, we have to do way more. We need to publish that entity. So when we create a task, right, there's nothing in here specifying that we have to do something technical like publish the event to say this task has been created, right? So there's no view integration. So to get it into the view, we need to publish the event. Well, now there's many tasks. So one of the tasks is we need to publish the integration event. The second one is we need to consume the integration event. And the third one is we need to update the GraphQL API and the UI to include this, right? So this single sentence involves way more. So, but they don't know that, and they shouldn't have to know that, and they shouldn't develop. And again, we push back on stories being too technical. So this allows the business to understand what they're doing, and the tasks as they're done allow the developers to focus purely on the tasks and only reference back to the requirement. This is what's driving this task, because essentially, if the process is being driven by work that is planned and prepared, etc., then they are going to be able to align every given task to a specified requirement. Definitely information gap between product owner and developer. The above description of an acceptance test is what I'd need, but I create that from whatever product gives me. But the point is, from a development perspective, you can create that as an acceptance test for you, right? You can basically take the requirements and say, okay, here's my acceptance test of what this is. And you could even work with QA to do that. And that's what I'm saying. QA can use this to verify the story, because you could use this to verify UAT, right? User acceptance testing can be done by verifying these things. QA could do many levels of testing, working with the developers, increasing their confidence, understanding the actual breakdown of the story, and understanding the requirements. So there's nothing saying in the task system we can't have some level of acceptance testing, right? But in the planning system, they don't really care about the technical breakdown, and that's the problem. From a business perspective, if we start, and that I think that no technical requirements or no technical components to stories comes from the fact that once we start adding technical components into this, it blurs the lines. Like, who's demanding that? This allows the product team to develop a story, to develop a planning item, to set the requirements as they see them, to discuss with the developers, and developers are able to go off and build that out in the way they need to track their work and understand what they're meant to be doing. and then the two tie together. They marry together. So there's nothing saying in the task system you can't create a set of acceptance tests. And maybe that's something we promote. Maybe that's something we say, hey, what are your acceptance tests for this thing? And we actually create a component that is defined acceptance tests. In that badges example I show, product gives you the kinds of badges they need, the thresholds, whether they want badge, history, etc. Right. So the requirements there might be we need to see badges. So the planning item might be we need to be able to see badges, or badges should be awarded to users on certain things, and I should be able to see the badge. I should be able to update. Right. Again, this is how they think about the story. Yeah. But you should capture requirements. You should capture rules, understanding of like, oh, a bronze award is this thing, you know. And again, that badges thing is kind of in the technical threshold anyway, so it, you know, it blurs. But yeah. But my point is that the planning doesn't necessarily need to overlap with the technical aspects in any other way than just being adjoined. By the way, this task here is originating from this requirement of this planning item. So you can look at it from both perspectives. I think to the product owner, they think of the app as purely the UI UX. Depends on the product owner. But in general, that's what they're trying, because it's the thing they see, it's the thing they interact with, right? It's what they know. So, and it's why we end up not trying to make the stories too technical. So, but what I'd like to achieve here is that separation, but without losing visibility into what's actually involved. And then items will be business decisions like have more community badges and fewer submission completion badges. Yeah. So, and again, if this doesn't work, if we feel as we're talking through this that things just aren't fitting, I'm not scared to address those things, right? That's the point. It's all grouped, right? Yeah, that's grouped. Is requirement the right word there? Here? Yeah. Requirements is the right. That is a requirement. A requirement of meeting this goal is this should happen. I should see this. I should see this, or I should be able to do this. These are requirements. If these are too general, then yeah, you can break your requirements up. Requirement is a UI element that has to be met for the a requirement is an outcome they expect to see or interact with, probably. In all likelihood, it's visual is the most important thing, whether it be an output, a report, whether it be an action, whether it be I receive an email, whether it be, it doesn't have to be UI specifically, but it's something that the product manager can say, yes, this is doing this thing, and visually or whatever is pretty much the only way they're going to confirm that. So it's not necessarily a UI element, but it is an outcome that they can verify. So it is a requirement of achieving their specific task or their specific planning item. And again, you're going to get into a world where these planning items are too general or they're too big and the requirements are ridiculous for them. So you say, hey, do you want to break that up? But that's not on the developers to say break it up. The tasks can be still broken out off of the requirements, and then those requirements don't necessarily need to be attached to the same planning item. I mean, long term, long term. Moving things around, I don't want to even get into that. I guess I'd want the UI elements requirement, like it should scale for all customers, is implicit, and I wouldn't want that listed. That is kind of the art of it, isn't it? I hate to interrupt what programs you're using there. Hey, Grid Square. Um, this one. Um, this is Excalidraw inside of Obsidian. So I'm using Obsidian for taking notes, and I'm using Excalidraw inside of it, so I can kind of keep a track of things. And welcome back. So yeah, it, Delta, a product designer, a product a planning, a product owner, product manager, whatever, might work together and come up with what the UI. Okay, got Obsidian, but I haven't used it. Yeah, for this it's very useful because I can keep all the ideas together. So as we're talking about things, marking down things, I can kind of just keep random notes. Also, this is checked into my GitHub, so I can actually retrieve it. Right. So I'm trying to, as I go, create some sort of system documentation. This is the core diagram of everything. But yeah, Delta, the as the product owner, product manager, whatever, it's going through the stories, going through the work to be done, right? They could build something that has too many requirements or that is too complicated. But the beauty of that is, again, it's not on the development team to say that's too big. The development team can still break these tasks down and break them out as actual work items. But the product team needs to realize, oh, well, if they've created 7 requirements and those requirements spawn 20 or 30 tasks, um, again, I'm trying to mentally differentiate, then the the product manager is not going to see the realization of this planning item specifically in a very quick time. So it's up to the product manager to figure out, oh no, we need to change this up. So I probably have identified a use case there for if that happens and the stories, I fell back into it. The planning item has already been tasked out, or the requirement has been tasked out, then maybe moving a requirement from one planning item to another is actually what's necessary. So we probably need something there. So that goes in future ideas. Um, Move requirement to another planning item. The planning item we're looking at will be an epic. The requirements store it, and then we make tasks based on those requirements. Yeah, if we want to align that way, yeah. It doesn't have to be. That's the beauty of it, right? It's this could be one task essentially. It could line up. You could put like a requirement in there, and it has one task attached to it, and it could be that simple. But at least it's described. It's outlined as to what's expected of it, and then it's executed on. So it could be a one to one. You could use initiatives to wrap up true epics because an epic is considered, I think, anything that is a multi-sprint set of stories, because we consider them too big. But we all have different working practices. We all have different breakdowns and whatnot. So yeah. Anyway, let's get into this and see how we do. And again, we're not scared of change, right? So if this doesn't work, we come back and design it again. Okay, so let's do this. So this would be tasks, as we're calling it right this second. And that would be there. So let's go. Actually, let's So confusing. Stop building now. Stop running. Stop that one running as well. Okay, so it's been a while since we've done this one, right? So right now, tickets and teams are projects that have little to no implementation, but they will, again, tickets has the basics. It's just not implemented as far as the UI goes, and we'll come back around on tickets later. We decided to switch to I decided to switch focus to planning, and now I'm transitioning into tasks because I think again it's a if I'm ever going to demonstrate what I mean from a workflow perspective, the only way I have of doing that is to actually do the basics of what's required, and that is to get that workflow in place so you can actually visualize what is going to go on. So let's create another solution folder here, tasks. And in here, let's create a new project, and that would be in source, and that would be a class library, and that will be tasks dot domain. I've already screwed that up. I've not followed my own naming convention there. Yeah. Delete the project. Helps if you actually delete it. Task domain source. So next month coming up, we got .NET 9 released. That's going to be fun. Because there's no way I'm going to not update this. So let's start with entity. And let's create a task. Okay. Oh, that'll be neat to see. I have no idea how hard it is to update from 8 to 9. I don't foresee any major issues. The challenge is when you're upgrading a .NET project like that is have the other libraries been updated? If they haven't, which they likely haven't at that point, do they have any features that are changed by .NET 9? Now, I don't think there's any major breaking behavior changes in .NET 9, so I don't think it should be a difficult task, but it's something always worth figuring out sooner rather than later. If I want to keep the project current, the only way I do that is by making sure it's all updated properly. Okay, so entity base defines that we have ID, identifier, date added, and last updated, and gives us domain events, right? So that's the basics of a task. Over here, we'll need a new database. And again, I'm breaking everything down into distinct databases, mainly for visuals. Ultimately, they could be whatever storage technology they want to be. Individual components of the system don't have to use SQL Server, as changes, etc. demonstrates. They could be schemas underneath a single database rather than actual separate databases. But yeah, actually, let's go here. Let's start with our scripts. So we need tasks, the directory, and then we're going to mimic this one, and that's going to be tasks. So our default init script creates a user. And from a development perspective, this is the simplest way. We then have one user that manages all databases. We don't have to worry about different users, etc. So, Samuel, how are you doing? How is things today? And we're going to do, yep. Oh yeah, that is one thing that got changed in 9, didn't it? The only libraries I might think would suffer from something like that would be the Kafka pieces. But even that might be a stretch. So let's add tasks. Use the default schema. Right. Yeah. Well, again, it's why you got to figure out. It's why it's always worth testing, upgrading, especially if you're trying to keep on the cutting edge, I suppose. Because this is not an actual. If I was building an application in work right this second, using .NET 8, when .NET 9 released, if that product hadn't actually been released yet, I would instantly try and update to 9. Oh, that's interesting. Not all your messages came through the chat. That the prompter didn't only got transitively. It didn't. Don't you mess around. I knew that was a browser window. Socket dropped some messages. Seems so. It's working again now. Interesting. Maybe. Okay, so let's get tasks in there. So a task in discussion yesterday, a task can have right, a title, a description, an assigned team, which right now has no value to the system. Right. So projects, maybe. So the way I think about this is when a task is created, it goes into a global backlog, right? Which means there is only one backlog. There are projects assigned to that thing, and a different team may need to pick that task up. Why a global backlog? Why not a team-oriented backlog? Well, you could have a team-oriented backlog by just assigning the team to the item. But overall, that backlog should be work that is understood and pointed. Which is why I'm still not entirely sure a task doesn't get a review date of some form. Because if a task is out there and is not pointed, there is risk that we do not understand what's necessary. So it does mean that we should review that thing. So for right now, we're going to ignore assigned team because that's a hard one because we don't have that concept yet fully fleshed out. So we'll just go with projects. So title, description, and assign projects. So a planning item has projects. And the idea of that is if a planning item is, if you break your system up into different components or however you do it, you assign a project to them, then one planning item might actually require changes in different projects. If you have, like, again, if I actually broke down things as I've done here, then those projects would align to my components because, it's just their relation to the system. And product would understand that concept because there's no value in product not understanding that concept as a whole, right? Oh, by the way, the system is broken down into many components. There's the planning component, there's the pipeline, there's the changes component, there's the tasking component, there's the tenant management. Where does it belong? So they would get that education, but something could span multiple projects. So we'll go with that for now. So a planning item here we see has associated projects, an associated project there. So we want to do something similar. So we want I'm going to start as I mean to go on. Private string title. I'll do. No, we don't need stars. And then we'll do something like that. And so in that, we'll need associate project. And that's going to mimic that essentially. It's going to mimic it, it's not going to be it. So that is task ID, project identifier, and then that's going to be task. That might trip us up several times, by the way. As we go through the process, that name is going to trip us up. So it's associated project is not an entity, it's not anything like that. It's because it's just an object that is stored as a reference in the database. So that said, we need a few things. So this one thing, by the way, and this is why I still truly believe this is a useful feature, a useful component to this process of planning and prep. The user wants to add a task. The task should have an associated project. Well, to be able to associate a project, no, not for this particular thing. From the view perspective, it does add a bit more complexity, but it doesn't add any complexity to capturing a task because the system, that associated project will never be validated in the task component. It won't be, is this actually valid? It's up to the producer of the information to do that. If it's not valid and you let it get through there, the view system will break anyway, because the view system won't have a reference, so it won't work to introduce a bad task identifier. So there's several places in the application just won't work that way. And yeah, there's no security hole there. But my first instinct there was, oh well, I'll need to do some extra integration pieces, not for creating the task I want, right? The associated projects aren't going to be consumed by tasks so that it can be lined up. There's no need for that information. All it needs is the GUIDs for this to exist. So a task. So let's go and create the table. New table. Tasks. I'm not sure ls tasks is the right thing for the database name, but we'll get there. New column. It's the same as planning items, has planning items. There's a driving table. There's a core piece of information. That's the source of truth for that component of the system. So we have ID. This is going to be big because there's going to be a lot of them. Identity. Primary key. New column. Identifier. Null. Column. We have title. In varchar 255. Still not certain how I'm going to do data length validations and stuff. So I haven't really done much of that yet. That's another pass. Varchar max. I haven't looked at this in a while. Best column to use for notes in SQL Server. Is it in Varchar max or is it? It's 2011. Really good advice there. Max. Okay. Sorry, I didn't notice that comment, Delta. Your dog feeding is only for a single team. Me dog feeding it now? Yeah. Which is again a part of why I want to get to. No, it's not. But it's why I want to get to a point where I can actually let other people use the application. We can join together. We can do things like that. We can test through those scenarios and do, maybe manage the project. The reality is I'm not going to, and that's a limit to me, right? I can only use my experience of working as part of large organizations and how they manage these processes as my measure of would this solve a problem. So there is a big challenge from the authentication perspective of large organizations that I do know of. There is a big challenge um, from that because multiple product stacks might exist that are managed by the parent organization. The individual organizations have access to theirs and or others within the organization. Um, so there is a challenge there. But I think the most important thing to keep in mind is that I'm trying to demonstrate the concept. Um, and I do feel the concept scales. It's just testing it from a large organization. You probably don't want to scale to Google at such a size. Why? If Jira is our current standard, and it seems across large enterprise to small enterprise it is, what would stop what I'm doing being any different? So associated projects isn't a column, right? There's no, it's a, they have 27,000 devs. That doesn't seem that large actually. Well, again, from an organizational perspective, those could be multiple organizations in the same parent organization. So again, that challenge is mentioned where the parent organization owns all the other organizations and users are assigned to one or more organization within that, then so tenant, then they can move between tenants. You're not likely to have one product stack. You're not likely to have the um, Amazon website developers be building AWS backend functionality, right? So, but the Amazon website developers may want to see, or may the product management might want to see some sort of other aspect of, they might want to see the Woot stack. Yeah. So, um, that is something that is on my mind because obviously a product manager going into the Woot or Twitch product backlog they might not want privileges to be given to that person to be able to create anything, but they can definitely see how it's being done because again, there's still a lot of flexibility in how you do this system, right? I'm trying to prescribe a process that can be still customized further, and we'll get into custom fields and all that sort of stuff later. Um, so there is a need there. There is something I do know that I need to identify. The challenge with that is authorization needs to be pulled away from um, authentication right a second. So authentication and authorization are both done through Auth0. I need the authorization component to move away from there so that it is owned by me and can be configured on a per tenant basis and is kind of pulled through. At Ericsson, when I was there was about 30,000 devs, but Ericsson as a whole was about 120,000. Yeah. Well, again, Jira being a management tool, Jira being about reporting and insights, yeah, there's a lot of non-devs. There's probably more non-devs that want to see access to things like this than there are devs overall. And yeah, because most developers just want to get on. Definitely my impression, having worked in Jira a couple of times now. Yeah, Jira is a management tool. It is not a developer tool, and it is made to be a developer tool. It's made to be by the organizations, not by not by Atlassian themselves. We switched to Agile, right? Because that task-based system, that focus on the work, is useful for the development, but it's not useful for the product. And that's exactly what I'm trying to bridge here. So the planning aspect of this application is meant to be that Jira component. The tasking part of the system is meant to meet that Azure DevOps need, of being what the developers need and how the developers track it and how the developers talk about it, without being all the fluff, like pointing, etc. Yeah, that's the overlap. But those points again are only for the developers to gauge effort. It's really difficult with Jira not to get stuck in if only the ticket was better mode or trying to fix things through some process. How did I put it the other day? I wrote that down, didn't I? Yeah, if 3 days has taught me anything, it's that no solution will ever work perfectly, because we cannot, as human beings, communicate effectively enough to work in a way that everyone is included. Blah 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 blah. Software gets developed despite the tools, despite the practices. When things aren't working, that's when we focus on process improvements. And time and time again, chase a strategy to get stuff done. So, when things aren't ticking along the way we think they should be ticking along, we tend to try and improve them. The game is Senpai. Thank you very much for the follow. I appreciate it. Hope you're well. That is an awesome name. If you have any questions, thoughts, opinions on what I'm doing, you're more than welcome to join in. This is an open discussion most of the time. Okay, so we said that task should have a title, description, associated projects. So we have that. So if we go over here, title, description, and associated projects will be its own table. So I think that is good for now. And then a new table and we need to basically mimic table, associated projects, DDL to clipboard. And this is ls tasks. And then this is task ID. Okay. So I do not add explicit foreign keys. That is a discussion for a much later date. 002 associated projects SQL. And let's add 201 tasks.sql. How do you get around scaffolding with no foreign keys? You mean scaffolding? Remember, I'm not using code first. Yeah, I'm generating the database. I'm not using migrations. Because you can still use implicit foreign keys. It doesn't need an actual explicit foreign key to work. And it's implicit because it has. So in Entity Framework, you can either specify your foreign key. Yeah, I'm not using migrations though. So the reason I'm not using migrations is because, especially in development churn, that gets very messy. So my intention is to build out all the scripts for everything, so it can be rebuilt from scratch every time. And then look at using migrations once the design is a bit more stable. If I start messing with migrations now, I'm going to get right. You can still do include, but Entity Framework, when it scaffolds, won't know how to create the connection right. It does. It will do. So Entity Framework has if I call this, so right now this won't have anything, but this will because it has task ID. It will automatically assume that that links to that. So it will use that task ID there to do that. So if I do include task off of associated project, it will get to the task. It doesn't need an actual foreign key to exist to do it. Yeah. So if you want to override that, you can specify that in the actual rules. The reason I don't like, so the reason I'm not using migrations again is because right now, as I'm developing this, the schema is very fluid. I do not want to commit to anything, and a migration will hurt. This migration's history here is because of the outboxes. Yeah. So yeah, this is all. Thank you very much for the follow. I appreciate it. Welcome in. Yeah. So if you're new to the stream, what I'm building here is we'll call it a project management platform. I do not have it running right this second, but overall it looks something like this right this second. The idea being that the product team can go off and plan a story, which I'm referring to as planning items right this second, trying to avoid overlaps with Jira, which is a more common tool. The idea of these are that the product team can describe what they want. They can define their requirements in their wording. Okay, Dota, thank you very much as always. Have a great day at work and speak again soon. Maybe in Discord later. I just realized I have an afternoon full of meetings today. um, so yeah, the idea is that the developers don't get involved in this part. The product team can write down what they expect to see, how they expect to see it, break down the requirements. From here, once they're happy that this is working, they can mark this as ready for planning, and the developers can sit with them and say, okay, well, we need to create several tasks, and we're referring to them as tasks for right now. What would traditionally be stories in Jira that the developers work off of. So a single requirement can have many tasks. So a planning item can have one to many number of tasks, right? Each task ties back to a requirement, which means that we understand the reason for everything. But from the business perspective, they can understand here's why we want this. But from the engineering perspective, on the tasks, we can add all the relevant technical information we want, all the relevant planning. We can even subtask out that task if we want to do that is the goal to be able to say, here's how we want to do it. The reason I'm doing this is because I feel that we try and fit both the concepts of Agile and Scrum into Jira and make Jira about Agile and Scrum when Jira is meant to be a supporting tool, but we get stuck mentally on some of the rules, such as it should have value, such as it should be testable, etc. So I believe there's some areas here to improve. I've been working on this for quite a while. So if there are any specific questions, if you would like to know a little bit more about the platforms, technologies, you're more than welcome to ask. I'm happy to show. This is not open source. This is intended to be a product. And I'm trying to develop it as professionally as I can in the spare time I have. Along the way, I've learned a lot. I've done a lot. It is a modular monolith, and it is growing by the day, and uses several technologies. And the overall system architecture looks like that. So we have an Angular client, an API gateway in front of the client, or in front of the system behind the client. The client talks through the gateway, for all things query and command, and the gateway routes to the relevant API to do the thing that it's focused on. Integration events are published, Kafka is used, changes are calculated, a view is produced, a GraphQL API sits in front of the view, and the client queries data via the GraphQL API, which gives us a lot of benefits. On your day job, do you work with C#? I'm studying to be a .NET developer at the moment. Just curious if you like your job. This is right now on my day job, I do not use .NET. I am working in PHP primarily. That is a recent change to my career path. And that is only one of a role change that ended up with me doing more PHP than expected. I am a C# developer. I have been a .NET developer for 20 years. So yes, I like C#. I like .NET. I like the way that .NET has gone. It's getting better by the year. It's faster. There's so many options to develop applications with it. Negatives, the documentation is all over the place due to changes, right? .NET wasn't always cross-platform. .NET wasn't always .NET 8. It was .NET Framework. It was .NET Framework 4.7. It was .NET Core. So there's a fragmentation from a naming perspective when you're trying to find information on it, which can make it a little harder at times. But there's quite a lot of documentation out there. There's a lot of resources out there. And I can say with certainty there's quite a lot of jobs out there for .NET. So it's worth studying. Are you following any particular patterns like CQRS? So yes. The overall application is command query as such. The client sends the request to do the data. So the command and the query are completely separated components in this overall design. So data is written to here. The idea being that these data stores are the source of truth for that information, and they get that data as quickly as possible with little interaction, with little calculation, etc. If there's calculation or anything to be done to that data, it won't be done in these databases. These databases are, as I said, the source of truth for this component. Behind the scenes on the API side, I'm using fast endpoints for the API endpoints, and using mediator, not mediator, so not that, which is the alternative library. This is a pattern and the name of the library, which I find confusing, but yeah, to use for the commands. So each command is sent through the mediator, and the handler receives that and does its job. Benefit of that, I have a lot of single responsibility. Events and stuff are triggered from within here. There's all sorts of other stuff in there. But the idea being that these are, this update literally updates the requirement. At what point in the architecture is RabbitMQ used? So I don't like to use Kafka, and I'm just going to, I know that you know ESA, but I'm going to the general explanation. I like to use Kafka for data distribution. So if it's a broadcast, I like to use Kafka, right? So if I publish a planning item, any system that needs to consume a planning item can consume a planning item. So for right now, when a planning item is produced, communications might receive that. Monitoring, which isn't currently in place, would receive that. Changes receives that, etc. But there are instances where I need to send a command. So notifications, when it receives some information and calculates that someone needs to be notified, it sends a command via service bus, which is backed by RabbitMQ, to communications to say, tell this person this, because it is a command. It is a direct, I need to tell you to do a thing. I know that you exist. This link is still, this could be replaced and this still tells it, do your thing. So there's no hard link, but RabbitMQ is used there. But it is a command in that instance. Similarly, tenant management, when a tenant is registered, when we register a new user, we send a command to communications to say, email this user, please, this information. So there's those two components where RabbitMQ is used right now. And I think the notifications pushes to view so another command that says, oh, by the way, there's a notification to be received. This is going to go away because that is an inbox, and that inbox should belong here after much thought. So we'll refactor that at some point. Yeah. So perfect? No. Flexible? Yes. And I've proved that out several times. The benefit of doing these are not microservices. They are components of the system. They have their own data store, their own, somewhat behavior. There's not a lot of behavior right this second in most of these things. When you see these outboxes, these are to produce messages. So the notification outbox is when something changes in the domain, it publishes a notification, and to make sure that that is isolated and only happens when a transaction is committed. That's why the outbox, so it disconnects the direct sending of events to the rest of the system. When that notification outbox processes, other things can trigger. So if there's an update needed to say, when a requirement is updated, right? We need to publish the integration of the requirement. So the rest of the system needs to know this updated requirement. And we need to publish a planning item to say, by the way, the planning item did get updated. That might not do very much right this second, because I don't believe the planning item actually changes in this event, which is a little difficult. We might have to look at that later. But ultimately, that's the idea. The notifications are only published to the domain when the actual changes are committed to the database. I'm not using DDD, or rather, I'm not trying to use DDD. Specifically, the patterns outlined traditionally. I am trying to follow clean architecture generally, and a pattern used within there is domain events. And rather than disconnect and try and move completely away from domain, I use that term. So, but I'm not trying to use the methods prescribed by DDD right now, mainly because I feel that as much as I understand the general idea of this after using, tools like Jira for a long time and going through software development for a long time, I don't quite understand the domain. So my long-term goal would be to be able to read back through DDD, and both Eric Evans and Vaughan Vernon's books, and kind of now understand and align my understanding of DDD with what I have. Now I have evolved a domain. Generally, these kind of would probably align with bounded contexts, potentially. But again, I don't want to say that I am using DDD because it's a complicated topic. It's like saying you're building a REST API. Depending on who's talking, they're going to have a very different opinion of whether you're building a REST API or not. So if you are interested in all this, by the way, I do stream to YouTube at the same time, and all the videos from past episodes are available on YouTube. So there is a lot of content up there. We're now up to 146, so we've been doing this a while. I primarily only work on this 2 hours a day, at most, Monday to Friday, which is all the time I can spare. So yeah, so let's get moving with this and see if we can make some progress on the task. Again, the development is not the focus of the stream primarily. Sharing my understanding, talking to other professionals, whether they be, like you're learning .NET, or whether you are, a veteran, or you're not even using .NET, you just care about looking at software. I like to have the discussions and try and share what I know. One thing I hold on to is there's no perfect way. And what matters more is that I understand the software that I'm building, that I am productive in the software I'm building. And just because it doesn't align to someone's expectation of what software should look like, doesn't mean it's wrong. There is no wrong. You're always learning, you're always growing. So if it works and you understand it and you can fix it without complexity, or with as little complexity as possible, then it's good. So you may see some things you don't agree with, you may see some styles you don't agree with, but it's always worth questioning, is that why is that better? Or is that better than what I do? Or is that worse than what I do? And why? Why do I like what I do better? Let's create another project. So we need to create tasks. If it works, don't fix it. Not necessarily. I won't be so dogmatic there. But I'm saying, I have evolved or developed my own way of doing things. That doesn't mean that I don't look at someone else's way of doing things and pull things from what they're doing and say, I like that. That makes sense to me. That clicks. Because ultimately, my goal is to write code that is understandable, that is maintainable, and you're not scared of changing. If you look at source code and you think, oh, I don't want to change that, that's the code you should change the most. You should lower your fear of, because any code you're scared of is difficult to change by virtue of being scared. So I would rather say, hey, I don't quite adhere to this pattern or this thing that someone said because they wrote a book on it. I should do it this way. I might take that and say, I like that. I don't like this. I like that. I don't like this. I'm actually going to adapt, and I'm going to use that style and evolve my own understanding and evolve my own thing. So I just think software development is a journey, not a defined rule. And if you start thinking, oh well, I've done this way for years, I don't want to change it. Yeah, probably bored. You probably don't want to be doing it anymore. One of the case in points, repository. So the repository here is not. This is used solely for using our Dallas specifications so that I can disconnect any link query stuff away from those handlers. Those handlers are easy to understand, easy to read. Their rules are potentially reusable, and I actually do use a lot of them because I'm using the same thing over and over again. But they are an abstraction on top of DB context, which some people won't like, but they really do serve the purpose here, and I do like using them. And if someone like Ardalis can use it, I'm not even going to worry too much about that one. So this is a tasks repository. And this is just a generic repository that everything in this domain will use, because it's going to use the single context. I create a context folder every time. Probably don't even need to do that because there's only ever one context in there for the most part. And this is the tasks text. Time to add some entity framework. Oh, that's incremented, hasn't it? DB context options. Yeah. That's stuck. But that does highlight the fact that I've got some updates to do. So let's task DB context. Share kernel. Oh. Trying to be consistent in code takes effort. It is worthwhile doing. Okay. That is not that, is it? That is shared repositories. That is. Yeah, okay. That's okay. No, that's not okay. That's not. Dependencies.8. Implicit add specification. Okay. Okay, that's fine. Not sure why results in there, but we'll figure that one out afterwards. Let's, before I go too far, let's do this. Manage NuGet packages. Let's see. Those are all dot versions. They're not major version increases. So there should be nothing that really creates any sort of problems for my application. And if I don't update them more frequently, then I'm going to have a harder job later on. So it's stuck. It's stuck because my baguette is not up and running. Now it'll work. Thank you for the follow, Ahmed. Ahmed needs a 2004 on NASA. Welcome in. How's it going? Okay, let's remove that. Let's see how many other packages we have to update. We might as well do this now. Yes, there's the argument to be had. Don't change too much. So we've got hot chocolate updates to 14. We've got our Dallas updates to 10. So our Dallas results been incremented a full version. This voice should be in the radio. Yeah, because the face certainly is a face for radio. Lumen validation, fast endpoints has been upgraded to 3.0. I don't worry about that. X unit, mass transit has been updated, minor version. MailKit, minor version. Or yeah. Yeah, let's go with it. Okay, that'll take a second. So again, what I'm trying to do right this second is this piece, right? I'm trying to move towards this piece. So again, from a product management perspective, create a task seems very simple. I just want to have a button to create a task. Now, or even new area for tasks, right? So there's a UI element to be had here, but being able to see a button on the task dashboard, creating a new button, creating a new task, adding that information requires a lot more pieces in the back end, and we might break them up into separate components themselves, right? Because the API for creating the task and structuring out the task, or the structure for building out tasks might be different. So you could be working on one story without the other, or one item without the other. So that's why I'm building it this way. So tasks will contain just tasks, and any associated information. It will publish integration events. So when a task is created, it will publish an integration event saying task. And I use Kafka for state transfer or for broadcast. So I use Kafka to say, hey, some information is available, and that will be planning item, task, tenant, attachment, notification, etc. It's up to the rest of the system to consume that and do what it wants with those pieces. So, but these components never talk to each other. They are completely isolated. So a planning database has no knowledge of anything in task database. These do not talk across each other. There is one exception right now. There's a direct HTTP client link to those two, but that is more because I didn't have mass transit and RabbitMQ in place to do commands. That will get removed eventually. So when we get back to ticketing, when you go to create a ticket and say, hey, this should be promoted to be a planning item, that will be a command to the system rather than a command directly sent to planning, and planning will be able to consume that appropriately. Data Hyacine, welcome in. Thank you for the follow. How are you doing? Okay, is this updated now? Yeah, okay. Everything's updated. We have lots of commits. I like to use Rider. There's all sorts going on here. So Foundation is my core. Foundation is the shared kernel, essentially. Liquid Sky is the primary project. There is another project called Control Tower, which will be under construction eventually, which is for the tenant management components. And that's why Foundation is shared, because there's pieces in there that need to be shared. So right now we're working on tasks. So again, this is Liquid Sky. It is a planning and project management tool. Its goal is very much to try and solve some of the issues I see day to day with our processes. We are focused today on building tasks. Tasks is essentially what we'd refer to as stories in Jira. But they are more developer focused. So right now we're going to build out the rest of this database component. So we have our task context, public db set task. tasks, set. There you go. And because of the way I've done this, and I'll go into this in a second, no, configurations, we need to do some extra pieces here. So tasks, configuration. I need to be, there's some inconsistencies in my naming of those things. This is an entity type configuration. So confusingly, in Entity Framework, the original, there was an entity type configuration on an object. Entity key task. Hey, dogs. I have two dogs underneath my feet, by the way. I'm not just talking to myself. Oh, pretty complicated. I'll also current code along developing a corporate site, just a little shenanigan with only, query and blogs model in the back end using .NET. Nice. Yeah. I have been a .NET developer for a long time. This is a passion of mine because I do want to focus on making developers more productive and less about the reporting. Task. It's because I'm using. Here we go. We get into that problem. So, task is again an overloaded term. I have been a developer for 25 years professionally. Last Friday, I had an anniversary stream to celebrate. I've been a .NET developer for 20 of those years, or more than 20 of those years, I suppose. And yeah, I love learning. I love building. I love doing cool things. I love trying to do new things. Start 2024. Nice. How's freelancing? Something I've never done. I've only ever really been employed full time. Yeah. I intend to for a long time to come. But yeah, if you are new to the stream, for those that are new to the stream, I know there are several of you now. This stream, if you find it productive to listen to me chattering about code and whatnot, and that's what you get from the stream, that's awesome. I share what I do. I'm happy to talk about what I do. I'm happy to demonstrate things and look into technologies. I do share several of the components of this project are open source. The outbots, the Kafka components, I share as open source. They're available on my GitHub account. And this is right now primarily the focus of the stream. So, but it's always okay to ask a question if you want to get more involved and understand code. I'm happy to jump around and show things. Programming alongside someone also making logical arguments to themselves helps me focus. Yeah. Yeah. Nice. So, task here. I've used a term that is an overloaded term. Overloaded in respect to it kind of is used by the framework. It is used by me. It is the best description for what I know right now. I do not want to call these stories. And I don't want to rename them stories from a technical perspective because it conflicts with the word task in the framework. If we are considering the domain, if we're considering people using the software, the best way to describe these things are tasks. The only way that changes is if we get to user feedback and we start to call we refer to them as something different when we hear them talked about in context of the software. and they're like, it's not really a task, it's a story or whatever, that's when we consider those things. So I should not change my software. My software should agree with the terminology I use on the front end. The reason being, it'll be far easier to understand and comprehend if I go looking for, I mean, tasks might be a bit difficult, but I have a tasks project folder. I have tasks components in here. So it's easy to go find that specific component of the application because we know what we're referring to. So again, ease of maintenance, ease of configuration, ease of understanding. So there's no point changing the wording here because it conflicts. So we use task equals tasks domain, right? Probably need to reference domain. Right. Entity base. Does that still need long? Entity type configuration. Oh, entity base type configuration. That's what I need. And that needs to be task long. There you go. So what this is, Game of Simplify. If it's not too much work, could you explain the flow of a particular request to the DB controller, handle, repo, etc.? Absolutely, yeah. So, we'll start from this side. So when a client request comes in, so the API, there's an API in front of every component, right? From the coding perspective, when you're seeing it on the screen on the stream, if you see the name match the this tool is Excalidraw inside of Obsidian. So when you see the name here, I don't need to be explicit. It is API. So this is the API layer. So in everything you see, if you see a folder that matches the name, like this doesn't have one that matches, attachments has one that matches, that is an API. Right. Changes doesn't, because changes is completely driven by backend components. There's no public API to changes right this second. But tenant management has tenant management. So these are the API layer. So a request comes through the gateway. The gateway is routing those requests to the relevant APIs based upon configuration. There's a whole lot of stuff in there. And then I have used API endpoints. So I'm not using controllers here. I don't like controllers because controllers become, and you'll hear me say this a lot, controllers become dumping grounds for like behavior. What we tend to do, and you'll see it even here, is we tend to align our controllers with the database object. And everything about our system becomes the database object. It's just a kind of a conduit to a single database object. It's not about the behavior. It becomes aligned that way. I'm no different in this respect, in that these kind of do align to database objects. So here you'll see I'm using the HTTP verb for the most part, except comment. This is something I'm still debating on my style for. So a request comes in. So let's go to post planning items. When I go and hit this button up here, I get a pop-up for new planning item. It allows me to create basically what you're seeing here on the right-hand side. That post will be received. I have a model that binds, and then I send it using mediator to the application components, right? So now my API here, now I could do validation here of is the data valid, is there a value, is this set, etc. I don't right this second because I'm in control right this second. The mediator then sends the command add planning item.command. Now, the style I have here is actually one recommended by Jimmy Bogard, who is the designer of Mediator library. Is to put the command, because the command and the handle are never disconnected. They're always one and the same. So he puts the command inside of a class called add planning item. So essentially, the class in this case acts like a mini namespace, right? We then have command and handler. So we don't have to have add planning item command, add planning item handler. We don't have to do that. We can do add planning item dot command, and the handler is then implicitly this handler. In here, we use a repository. Again, the repository here is just an abstraction on top of DB context. It's built by our Dallas specification library so that I can do things like queries without being super verbose inside of my handlers and, you know, making them more complicated. But ultimately, it's just a wrapper. Love it or hate it, it's what I'm doing. So here we have planning item create. This creates a new planning item. If there's any projects attached to that request, we're going to associate any projects, and then we're going to just add async. So that's what gets it into the database. The put for the update. We're going to update, same pattern, same process. We're just going to call update planning item.command. Here we use the repository to query. So this first to default async planning item by identifier, no tracking with details spec. So what this does is a spec that includes all the associated pieces of data where identifier. So it kind of, again, wraps up that query behavior so that it's a little easier to understand. So this code is nice and clean. It's just, hey, go and get me this planning item, and here's the rule I want you to use. So those rules can be placed in a directory and understood and managed separately. Not really testable right this second. I haven't figured out a good testing strategy for specifications yet. There's some challenges it poses. And again, if there's no changes, then I don't do anything. Otherwise, update the planning item. And this is a domain service because updating a planning item is more involved than just saving to the database. So this actually injects a domain service for doing that because there's more things to touch and update, etc., and produce. But ultimately, this handler then becomes the guard. So if it's more complicated, touches more components, I do have in my domain a domain service, which is this, because updating a planning item involves more steps, right? There's individual methods to call, so it's a little bit more messy. And that way you've got one way of saying, hey, update the planning item with this information, and it will always be done this way. So what happens, by the way, in those, when I update a planning item, when I go to that domain service, these individual methods exist on the planning item entity. So if we're going to DDD, there's more kind of aggregate behavior. I'm still not sold overall on that design, but it is working for me right now. So we're going to keep using that because I'd rather have a consistent way of doing it, even if I don't fully like the way I'm doing it. But in here, what will happen is this will, assign the user. If they match, it will just do nothing. Otherwise, it'll set them. And it will add a domain event. These domain events, like I said, will actually get stored when this data is committed to the database. They get stored in an outbox, this notification outbox. So everything that's happened in the system, as far as events go, is stored here. We'll talk about archiving and stuff later. And the idea of this is I only get this event stored to this database table when that actual change has been committed to the database, which means I've guaranteed this thing happened. I know that it happened. It means I can also roll back and not produce events that were unnecessary. So this adds 2 domain events. These domain events can be reacted to independently. So once that's committed to the database, a process is constantly running, checking that queue. It gets that queue. It says, oh, by the way, you need to be notified of this. So over here in our subscribers, so planning item assigned. We actually don't listen to that yet, so that's great. Planning item updated. So you get planning item updated, and all this does is say, okay, go and get the planning item based upon the ID now, because now it's stored in the database. We know it's stored, so we know we're getting the current version, and publish it. So publish what we currently have in there. So it's a bit more of a complicated workflow. It's a disconnected workflow. The handler doesn't do every single little thing, but it does give me some guarantees and does give me some resilience in that piece. And I've validated that. So when you're signing up for a new tenant, there's lots of things to happen. If one of those things fails to happen, the entire thing will roll back and the events will not be produced to the larger system, which is the benefit. So suppose you could say this is event driven. Again, I'm not a big fan of trying to put your handler is very clean. I've seen so much business logic put in there. Yeah. Again, right now there's not a whole lot of business logic. But the way I'm trying to build this is very much from composition. So when I say, hey, here's the data for a planning item, I want to store that planning item. Don't need to do anything extra to that. Put business logic in Sprox, clean handlers. You will not bait me into that. So when the planning item is saved, it publishes an integration event. So parts of the system can react to that. So notifications, there is a concept, and you'll see it in the screenshot. See this icon here? That is notifications. So if I want to be told that this thing changed at all, I can check that. It will then show a line through it. And then when somebody else changes this planning item, I'll get a notification in my inbox, which is on my dashboard. I can't show the application because everything's in flux, right? But I'll get told, hey, this changed. And the overall aim of the project is very much to do that. Like I want to be able to say, okay, if the assigned user changes, or if the projects change, or if the status changes, or if a new requirement is added. From a management perspective, I want to be able to have management say, I care that this happened, or I want to be told about this, and I want to be told about this. However, that's an entire system piece. The reason I'm saying that is because that is not it's not the job of the planning item component to decide who cares about a planning item changing. So by the integration event firing, I have this changes. I can calculate what changed. I publish what changed. Notifications is a component unto itself that watches for those changes and says, oh, the assigned changed, or this item changed, and I have subscribers. Oh, okay. Now I need to tell them. So I'll need to tell the communications pipeline, by the way, here's a notification. Right. And communications will deal with how does the user want to do that. So the business logic we typically put into the application itself doesn't need to exist where we store the data. It can be disconnected. Now, you do have a downside to that. You have a naturally disconnected state. You have a challenge of, oh, if you need to know something about who did something, then we've got to kind of figure that out later. If you want to get something immediately, you're not guaranteed you're going to get it immediately. It might come hours later if the system's particularly slow, or if the system has crashed. But you get resilience in that you will, in all likelihood, still get it. So yeah. So my goal is to keep my handlers as single responsibility. Their responsibility is storing that data, is updating that data. The integration side of things, when we pull those events from Kafka, that's a little bit messier.
Not too messy, but it is a little bit messy. Yeah. So the receivers is a Kafka consumer essentially. It's just an abstraction around that. And when we update the planning item, we receive it, and then we send off another command just the same way we do as the API. These handlers are a little bit more full, but not too much. So these do a little bit more. They are built to store the data no matter what. So if they have dependencies on other data, they will stub that data out so it's all uh, handled. Right now, these are not so much idempotent. Idempotent. Um, I think we determined this last time in that I need to essentially what I need to do is something like if my existing last update is less than my incoming, that's all that matters. It doesn't matter whether anything else has changed. Right. So we probably do need to do that at some point. Um, but again, the intention of the system is such that I can change those things. I can update those things, and I can update those things in confidence. I've got unit tests around a lot of these pieces, right? Really, dog? Is that a good dream? So, yeah. Um, Fuel, it's funny you mentioned that. I know I pretty much think I've got a handle on your sense of humor at this point. So I know the uh I know that. But um I recently had a discussion. I can't remember whether it was with someone on stream or not, but um about good management of procs and that everything's committed to like most of the application lives in the database in stored procedures. I can't remember whether that was on stream or whether that was someone at work. That kind of terrifies me. But maybe that's because I haven't seen good source control. Was it you? I know I've had a conversation about store prots with maybe it's your community day, but I've also had a conversation at work, and I'm not sure whether I'm crossing them over. But either way, it's the source control and the management um that concerns me the most about that. And also, SQL is not easy to write effective business logic in, or T-SQL. Um, that is true for the application I'm working in. Most of the complex BL is in the DB. You talked about not being able to keep it in source control, yeah. Sprots in source control. It's possible. I know Redgate have done a lot of work on that piece. Specifically, I know Redgate. Um, but it might be that conversation plus a work one that I'm combining into one big scary source control store proc. I'm glad you air quote. I'm glad you. I'm reading it as that, but I'm glad you quoted cool. Um, no. Like to me, stored procs being the backbone of the application is no different than having a Microsoft Access application back in the days. It just feels like that's not a solid solution overall. But maybe that's because I've never seen effective store procs. And database, I still think a lot of developers don't understand database. So is it driven by someone that's actually We have many, and it makes me cry. Yeah. So let's finish this out a little bit. So you've seen this pattern before. You'll see it again. This is an interesting pattern, so much as it is but it's not a good DB if you need more than one connection at a time. Yeah, true. Like, I'm not sure these days what it means to have no, I take that back. I'm trying to figure out how I'm saying it. Considering the developers I've seen, the newer developers I've seen, I don't know how they would deal. I don't know how they would deal with this sort of architecture, let alone one that was heavily database driven. Yeah, and if the developers are not competent DBA level developers, I feel that Sprots risk a lot more. I mean, I know they are debuggable. I've debugged store procs. But it's still a challenge. So yeah, I don't know what that looks like in the future. So task description, did I? Yeah, associated projects was never where we need to do something similar. And that's on task. That's on task ID. See, I'm manually defining the foreign key there, but it actually wouldn't be necessary as much. Also, do you use encryption to prevent SP codes from being visible on the customer side? These methods seem like 15, 20 years ago to me. I've not looked at the security around that sort of stuff, so yeah. Writing Sprock handling logistics though is hard because logistics is kind of hard. It would be hard in C# too. In F# it would be easy, of course. Yeah, I mean F# solves all the problems. This is necessary. Again, if you haven't seen this pattern before, what this is doing is making it so that I can't change these fields of task. So I can't just create a new task because I won't be able to set any of the actual fields here. We don't install on customer site, but in SQL Server, the encryption is used to be awesome. Hi, Vindel. How you doing? Oh, man. How are you guys not talking? I'll shout at the one person I know who's streaming later on. If you like .NET development, if you are interested in more application level .NET development, One Lion streams Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. On Fridays has a community day, which is an awesome time to attend because you can hear different opinions oftentimes. All days are good to attend. But One Lion's building a financial management tracker. He's gone from a different perspective than I have. He's started by building up the design and laying things out, and he's taking it as a how do I put it? A case study as such. Like, oh, I am the developer, I am the designer, kind of using those roles and trying to take on those roles and build out those components. And it's very interesting to watch that. Oh, well, look, the design was given this way, but it doesn't quite fit. So now we're going to tweak it, we're going to change it and build that out. So I would highly recommend checking that out or him out, that stream. Being that I now have used all my shout outs. Thindle is also a developer, a .NET developer. So again, if you like .NET stuff, Thindle works in updating older .NET applications into newer tools. And the genuine gripes developers have towards designers and PMs. But thanks for the kind words. Yeah. And again, I'm going to try and make it a part of my vocabulary to use the word group, not team. I still think that we should be a team of product, QA, UI, UX, design. I mean, I know sometimes they lump under product, but product, QA, design, and development should be groups under the team. Problem with the SQL Server was that they stored the key in the DB in my case in order for SQL to run the sprot, so I had to dig it out and then decrypt the sprots with that. Ugh. Need to start a new project and leave the guy who fixes all stuff Monica behind me. I don't know. I think that's a very good thing to be known for. To be able to say, hey, look, here's your old application, here's how you move it forward. That's a challenging thing. And yeah, hello Napalm, hello. Did you speak it one line as well? Have I just kind of blown past that fact and forgot that I said hello? An ad is going to start in 30 seconds. I will see that ad through, and then we'll talk about what comes next in this piece. And as is usual for me right now, I fail to end on time. Gaming. So that was my first time talking. My mentioning communication. I was a bit focused, but here's you. Well, hello, Wallen. My apologies. Some companies do not want to follow technological changes, so they load the entire business into the DB and only change the data display process for current technology. It's, of course, a different perspective depending on the needs. Developing software is hard. Communicating the requirements of developing software is very hard because you are translating. Changing existing software is very, very hard because what is working is making money. So why change it? If what is working is not working well, we're scared of it. So why change it? Right? Why try and make drastic change? Brownfield development is expensive and risky because you may not understand the system quite as well as you think. So software development is hard, and the best phrase I've heard and used of late is take bold steps. Sometimes you've got to take a bold step. Sometimes if you want to move things forward, something put all logic in DB is the right choice, period. Some things it's the wrong choice, period. It has pros and cons. I mean, again, what skill set are you working with? When you're building an application from scratch, or when you're building an application and you want to employ people, saying, I'm going to go off and use this obscure technology or this obscure practice is dangerous because you don't know, you don't have a market to tap into. There might be very few developers capable of doing what you want. So you've got to kind of pick a mainstream technology. And yeah, that moves all the time. But if you've got a bunch of people that are really, really comfortable with the database building the application, then it's going to lean more towards the database. They feel more productive there. And I think that's not a wrong answer. But as you evolve, the business, does the market, still produce that sort of skill set? That's a challenge. It's always middle ground. That said, running all databases on the same server and having cross DB references and massive responses is not the way. Yeah. Well, like everything else, we tend to over complicate. Yeah. No, so stored procedures are not difficult, but moving business logic into stored procedures and yeah, it was one line showing off the calls to other stored procedures from within stored procedures. I haven't seen that in a long time, and that sort of stuff scares me because you are composing an application purely within the stored procs. But again, that's scary because I'm a .NET developer. I'm happy in the code. I'm happy using Entity Framework. I understand its limitations. I understand its challenges, but I've also touched the database. um, no, I get the point. I get the point there. But in the languages we use, well, yeah, I get the point there. But it's more, again, fear of that database layer, fear of that code management of I've seen the challenges that I've seen from a lot of developers with SQL. So in my working world, that would be a scarier concept, I suppose. So yeah, fun, fun, fun. Okay, looks like the ads have ended. Looks like we're free of them. Um, so let's talk about what's next. Tomorrow we will get the task, the API components pieced in there. We'll get those the ability to add a task to the system working. We'll flesh that out a little bit. We'll probably put the UI might be a little bit more difficult because the UI requires a little bit more finagling. I mean, I could put the button in there temporarily just to test that process, so that might be worthwhile. Um, so we'll see how that goes, but we'll move to the task tomorrow. Um, and then hopefully ending out the week with um, being able to add a task to the system, and starting next week moving towards producing the tasks from the requirements. That might take a while. Yeah. Just because you can use GoTo in C# and write horrible mess of code, it's just C# content because of that. Well, again, I think it's definitely based upon general comfort and looking at the market and looking at how you're going to maintain the application going forward. I think that's a very key thing to remember is if you're going to pick a technology, like in the world, in a world, um, I'm building this application and I'm building it in a componentized method so that in theory, I can plug in another component using a completely different language, a completely different structure, and it will still work as long as it can consume the events or consume the API. However, it's done, I could use different technologies. If you let developers run wild and pick whatever technologies they want, so if someone comes along and says, "Oh, I'm going to add this new service," I'm just going to use Rust because I'm more familiar with Rust, and I'll use Rust. But they're the only developer that uses Rust, and all the rest don't. Then there's a high risk of fragility in your system because now you have one developer has the knowledge of that component. What that naturally leads to is, oh, that's that guy's stuff. Or, so um, let me read that back. Just because as things get more complex, store procedures tend to grow. I've seen SPs that are thousands of lines long. Look at the simplicity and readability of the C# code here. Azure the bot's a load of guns, but this application written by one smart dev. I have 100 mediocre devs. I'm not sure the C# code will be elegant, and also add rush fee. Exactly. That's the measure, right? I think that was a compliment. Thank you. But you've got to keep an eye on the quality of what you're producing. You've got to make the team responsible for looking after that. And again, if you let a dev run off and develop something in a different framework, a different language, you've got to understand the risk to the business. Yes, it's cool to do, but should you do it? Maybe not. Look at your market. Look at the development pool you've got to pull from. If everything's in SQL and all of a sudden SQL developers start to drop away, then maybe it might be worth considering what that means for the future of the business, the maintainability, because the people that stay that are very knowledgeable about that SQL thing, they might be asking for a lot more money in future. Depends. So it's just again, from a business perspective, software is not just a tool that can be switched in and out. It is something that should be understood. It can be supplied in all manner of ways. And there's no wrong answer, like everything else. Right? It's whatever you're comfortable with, whatever works for the group you're in, whatever, again, the team matters more, the productivity of the team. And I do mean that at a global scale, right? Not just the development group within the team. And Mr. Anhorn, good morning. Okay, but it's 12 minutes past 9. I have to have finished. It's hard to keep a team on the same page. I've just had to re-enable a few lint rules to make sure we have good code. Devs will do anything to deploy code. Damn it, ignoring all the lint rules to get it done. Yes, cutting corners is something, but again, that's also something that can be, I do feel can be reinforced from the business perspective is developers should be allowed to say no. And this is not good for the code and agree upon a path and then reject PRs that have those hacks and problems with them. So I think it's a team solution to reinforce good practices. And yeah, most just get it done. That is not the right way to approach software. If you're doing that now, if you're in work and you're thinking, oh well, I've got to get this done, just get the code done, I'll come back around later. And I've done that a fair bit in this application, understanding the risks of what I'm doing, right? I'm moving on normally because of the stream. It's not beneficial for me to get stuck in the weeds, so I move on, etc. Thanks for stream. I've been looking. Mr. Van Horn, thank you as always. We need to figure out people to raid that. I really wish there was more .NET devs. Because it's a Godot developer all the time, which I don't have a necessarily a problem with, but it's just a difference from what we're doing here. And it tends to be Fullbots, Beegs, or Andreas recently. So if you're a .NET dev, I'm playing chess. If I could retire, I would stream during these hours. Yeah, it's too bad. .NET is just too enterprise for hobby projects. Yeah, yeah. That's why going to Godot streams is often good because a lot of them are using the .NET side of things. Beegs is making a video. Fullbots is coding his game. We rated Fullbots. Yes, we rated Fullbots on Monday. Yesterday we rated Andreas. Andreas isn't streaming today. I don't have anyone to take you to other than Fullbots, so off we go. Nice to stream during the day. May even make me stream again. Or yeah, enterprise performant, and there is Python. I just don't get it why it's making such waves in enterprise. I can see they're not saying no to management when it comes to apps. My main app has been so bogged down by adding new things, they're just clunky. They promise there's a new program, but that's been said for the last year. And it continues on. But again, it's an application wide problem. No, a corporation wide, an enterprise wide problem that we need to be able to be treated like experts. But anyway, We're going to raid Mr. Bots because I have no one else to raid. Not that Mr. Bots is not a great streamer as well. He's building a game. It is awesome. I highly recommend checking it out. So if anyone else is thinking about doing .NET streaming and streams at this time, I will happily raid into people. So take care all. Have a great rest of your day. I will be back tomorrow with more of this. Thank you very much. Again, if you want to join Discord, there is Discord links in the panels below where we can continue any conversations, etc. Trap, good morning, and thank you very much for hanging out. Take care all. Bye.